Aboriginal land. Warrantu Takamuna Milaitina Pakana. Building Nika Takamuna Milaitina stolen Milaitina Pakana. So we stand on Aboriginal land. This building behind us stands on stolen land, Aboriginal land. So I'll remind those fellas up there about that. Minakani, Nina Tu, Will Hodgman. Warrantu Putia Putia Kani. We will not be silenced. We would be derelict in our responsibility to our ancestors and our elders, past and present, to allow anyone, no matter what government or organisation or whoever, to silence us. Those old people, our ancestors, fought and died to protect country. And my oath, Pakanamana Mapali will do whatever we need to do to continue on that legacy of protecting our country. We will do whatever it takes in their memory and for our future. In January of 1832, 26 Aboriginal people marched through the streets of Nipaluna, proud and free. Shipped off to Ibalena soon after, they never saw their country then. Like those old fellas, on that day, we, the Pakana community, have continued to march through the streets, whether it's Nipaluna or Patawai or Palanawina, Kanamalukata. We continue to do that, and we won't stop. With those old fellas, Montepiliata and Tukalunginta, and the 24 other people that were accompanying them on that day in January, they are out in front. They're leading the way for our community still. The threat of proposed new heritage laws, which would fine us around $26,000 for stepping on a heritage site, proposed in the days of the Labor Green government, I think, did not stop us from trying our darndest to protect Kutalina. And this new proposed legislation will not stop us either if it goes through. We will assert our sovereign right to protect country, and she sure does need protecting. Nairi Nina too. And I've got one thing more to say. In the words of Shane Howard in that Solid Rock song, standing on solid rock, standing on sacred ground. Will Hodgman and his Liberal Party are on borrowed time. Nairi Nina too.
These new anti-protest laws being introduced to Parliament, it was also the week that they decided to remind us that they would like to smash over Aboriginal heritage into Kaina and reopen the four-wheel drive tracks. It's the desecration and the impacts onto Kaina and these people's lands that we are here to oppose. Will Hodgman, it is an absolute disgrace that you continue to find the protesters the reasons to blame for your own problems. The Workplaces Protection from Protesters Amendment Bill was tabled in Parliament in the last fortnight and is expected to be debated in the House of Assembly this week. The bill is a second attempt by the government to introduce this legislation after a first attempt was shot down by the High Court in 2017 thanks to Jessica Hoyt and Bob Brown, who challenged those laws. The High Court first shot down the laws in 2017 because they were too broad, vague and difficult to enforce. They've extended it now to include public thoroughfares. They've also introduced another offence of inciting somebody to interfere with business premises, so it broadens it out even further. There are plenty of laws on the statute books that cover every single instance of behaviour that these laws appear to be aimed at. Like the 2 brave people who were arrested in the Tarkine in the last month, we are out there on those front lines right now today. There are people in those forests defending them. They are willing to be arrested because they think rainforests should be protected, not smashed. And we will stand up and say that we'll continue to protest, like all of you will who have joined us here today. I'd like to introduce Richard Griggs from the Civil Liberties Australia, who's up next. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you so much for coming out in support of peaceful protest on public land. Thank you for coming out in support of free speech and freedom of association. It's saddening and frustrating that in 2014 I attended a very similar rally to this, also organised by the Bob Brown Foundation, to speak against the 2014 version of these laws. As we all know, and we've just heard from Jenny, those laws were overturned in the High Court. So it's deeply frustrating and disappointing that here we are yet again needing to speak up in support of peaceful protest on public land. But, as they say, the price of freedom really is eternal vigilance. So good on you for turning up today. Thank you very much. In terms of this legislation, it is a terrible trifecta. Firstly, is it not only deeply illiberal, secondly, it's deeply unjust, and thirdly, it's dangerous. It's illiberal for the state government to attempt to use the apparatus of the police and the courts to shield business from valid public criticism. And secondly, it's deeply unjust to threaten people into silence with harsh prison sentences and fines. It's worth noting that under current laws, somebody who were to trespass into our homes would face a maximum jail term of 1 year. If they were to do that with a firearm, the punishment would rise to 2 years. Yet under these anti-protest laws, people who do no more than gather peacefully on public land would face jail terms up to 4 years. These punishments are deeply unjust. They're deeply disproportionate, and I certainly join with all of you in calling them for to be defeated here in State Parliament.
Where are they?
So that not only are these laws illiberal, unjust, but they're also dangerous. They're dangerous because of the message they send to us, the community. Our state government would have us believe that our role to sit down, be quiet, and trust them, the government. Well, that's a dangerous message. It's not one we're going to accept. So thank you very much for coming today. The points I've just raised are all set out in a petition, a parliamentary e-petition, which is asking for our lower house to reject these laws in their entirety when they're brought on for debate this week. Please, when you're next at a computer or your phone, visit the parliamentary website, add your name to the e-petition. Also, please do consider reaching out to the 2 key non-government legislators in our state lower house, being Madeline Ogilvie and Speaker Sue Hickey. Their votes are going to be absolutely crucial, so please fill in the petition and reach out to both Madeline and Sue and explain your concerns. So thanks again very much for coming in support of peaceful protest on public land.
Thank you, Civil Liberties Australia, for all of your civil liberties. And that petition is also roaming around here today that you can sign. If you haven't already signed, please sign the clipboard version that's walking around with many people. We also think that you've got a fair bit of work to do. When you go home from this rally or go back to work, you need to get more people to sign that petition. And I'm going to reiterate, Madeline Ogilvie. It's really concerning on ABC Radio, if anyone heard her last week, where she's erring to the side of voting for these laws with outrageous claims such as she's worried about her children working in takeaway restaurants and the intimidation of protests. I'm not sure Eric, Scott and I have spent much time in restaurants, and we certainly haven't intimidated any young people in the history of our protests. So it's these sorts of lies and intimidation that the community then gets riled up and think that they need these protest laws. Madeline Ogilvie needs your work. She really needs you to contact her. She needs people to let her know that these protest laws are overreach. One of the comments she also made was that the removal of reference to protest was something that reassured her. However, the great Therese Henning piece that was in the Mercury last week pointed out that that's actually a major problem of these new laws. Removing the reference to protesters makes it too broad and makes it a major problem. So please do get in touch with Madeline Ogilvie. Make it your effort to contact her as soon as you can when you leave today. We'd also like to take a unique opportunity to thank the ALP. I know some of you may not have heard me say that before, but I am going to thank the ALP because Labor voted against the Hodgman government attempt to resurrect its anti-protest laws last time they were in Parliament. And I have heard from Rebecca White that while she wasn't able to join us at this rally today, Labor will be doing the same with this bill. They will be voting down this bill. So thank you to the ALP. A party that stands up for protesters and stands up for all of you is the Greens, and I'd really like to thank Cassie O'Connor for joining us today and acknowledge that Cassie and Rosalie are going to stand up for us against these protest laws. I'd also like to acknowledge an apology from Nick McKim and Senator Peter Whish-Wilson, who are in the Parliament today, but please welcome Cassie O'Connor.
You gorgeous bunch of potential criminals. It's so lovely to see you all here today and at relatively short notice. I too wish to pay my respects to Tasmania's first people, the Palawa Pakana, to Aboriginal elders past, present and emerging. I pay our deepest respects. I acknowledge this country was never ceded by its true owners, and I pay my deepest respect to the warriors of the Palawa and the Pakana who fought hard to defend their country. So, the Workplaces Protection from Protesters Amendment Bill of 2019 is the most extreme, hard-right, anti-democratic legislation to be tabled anywhere in this country. It is a shame, it is a damning indictment on the Hodgman government. It's a sure sign of early onset fascism. This is a government that wants to enact a Bill of Rights for business while restricting our own rights as citizens in a democracy. Well, we won't stand for it. No! We'll fight oppression and the plunder of nature as we always have. These laws are intended to have a chilling effect on our democracy. They continue the Hodgman government's ongoing enabling of the corporate plunder of this island, the privatisation of public protected areas and our heritage treasures like the Treasury building. The Liberals are alienating Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Tasmanians from their own lands and waters, from their own protected areas, from their own Crown lands, and from their marine environment, which is being polluted by industrial fish farming. They're even seeking to alienate us from our own roads and thoroughfares in this legislation. Standing up to defend our forests, marine waters, our wilderness, the rights of workers to challenge a business that rob them or mistreat them, all will be criminal offences if the Liberals get their way. We won't stand for it. We don't even have to be at the site of a business protesting to have committed a criminal offence under these laws. That's how draconian and oppressive they are. It will be an offence simply to organise a protest against a business activity even a government business enterprise. This is the Liberals covering their own asses again. So wide and punitive is the scope of these laws, a person could get arrested for refusing to leave a place like Bunnings or Woolworths having asked for a refund. A journalist could get arrested for physically impeding a business in the course of their work. That is chilling. The Hodgman government wants to silence civil society. It wants to crush our democratic spirit. Well, good luck with that. It wants to snuff out the spirit of defending this island from threat, as Tasmanians have over generations since 1803. It wants to give big business a completely free ride to take, to pillage, to plunder, and to rob workers of their pay without protest. Attorney General Elise Archer wants us to believe these laws are about protecting workers. Like, since when have the Liberals ever given a stuff about workers? Because workers too will be robbed of their rights if these laws pass. I'll just read you a little bit of what the first law officer of the land had to say about these laws over the weekend. Having a whack at Labor for doing the right thing for a change, she says, they've also joined with the Greens to put protesters ahead of law-abiding workers, making completely false claims and spreading fear about our Workplaces Amendment Bill. She says, we are committed to protecting all Tasmanians' right to work without being prevented from doing so. That's what our Workplaces Amendment Bill is really about. Labor's stance show that claims made at their state conference of breaking away from the Greens and supporting workers were just hollow words. This from our own Attorney General. In contradiction of advice from the Tasmanian Law Reform Institute, Professor George Williams, a national constitutional expert, and the UTAS's constitutional expert, Dr. Brendan Gogarty, all of whom have said these amendments are dangerous and deeply flawed. And it'd be really interesting to know what the Solicitor General said too. So what kind of government seeks to enact these laws?
Corrupt!
A fearful one.
A dictatorship!
That's one that is afraid of being held to account for its own epic policy failures. They know civil society is angry. They know people are angry about plans to open up new coal mines in Tasmania. They know people are angry about plans to log old growth forests in Tasmania and the 356,000 hectares of some of the most beautiful carbon-rich forests in the world, which will be opened up from April next year. They know people are angry about plans to desecrate Kununyi with a cable car, and they would lock up any one of those 6,000 people who gathered in the foothills of Kununyi in May of 2018. In the Liberals' eyes, they are all potential criminals. And they would lock up our children who gathered here on the lawns of the 20th of September this year, 15,000 or more, striking for climate. The Liberals would lock them up. Shame on them, and we will not stand for it. The Liberals want to arrest their way out of a climate emergency. Well, there's not enough room in all the prisons in Tasmania to jail the people who'll be standing up and striking for a safe climate, to protect our forests, to stop new coal mines, So this week, when this odious, dangerous early onset fascism bill is debated in Parliament, my wonderful colleague, Dr. Rosalyn Woodruff, and I will be fighting it with every word on every clause. And we know this time Labor will be standing with us. Now, my colleague, the independent member for Clark, Madeleine Ogilvie, makes much of having a law degree. Well, if she's serious, if she wants to be taken seriously as a person who understands the law, she must vote against this legislation. She must listen to the experts from the Law Reform Institute, Professor George Williams, Dr. Brendan Gogarty, and she must stand up for democracy. It is so important that both Madeleine Ogilvie and Sue Hickey stand with all of us here today, defending our right to peaceful protest, defending our right over decades to protect all that is good and true about this island. I hope everyone here sends both Madeleine and Sue an email or makes a phone call, because we can stop this legislation in the House of Assembly this week, and it should be stopped dead in its tracks. Thank you so much for coming out here today, you gorgeous bunch of potential criminals. Thank you.
A huge thanks to Cassie O'Connor, and a really big round of applause, please, for the two of them who have to face this draconian government this week and fight for these laws to be put away. We stand here united with so many groups and so many members of the community today, and I wanted to give a special shout out to the Retired Unionist Network who marched down earlier, and we were so stoked to see you guys arrive. Thank you so much for being here. I'd also like to take a moment to speak on behalf of Rodney Croom, who couldn't be here today but sent us a message, spokesperson for Equality Tasmania, who says the proposed anti-protest law violates the democratic freedoms of all Tasmanians, including those who are still struggling against discrimination and prejudice, such as LGBTIQ people. Should a business, or anyone else for that matter, adopt discriminatory policies on sexual and gender minorities, everyday Tasmanians have an inalienable right to peacefully protest against those policies. In 2016, the state government tried and failed to water down our gold standard Anti-Discrimination Act to allow hate speech by religious figures in the name of freedom of speech. But now it wants to roll back freedom of speech in the name of company profits. Clearly, our decision makers don't understand what human rights are or how to protect them. The result is that the human rights of Tasmanians are swinging in the political wind. It's time for a Tasmanian Human Rights Act to ensure the human rights of all Tasmanians are equally protected and can't be used and abused for political purposes. I would also like to encourage any of you who have time this afternoon to join the Walk Against Violence and Elimination of Violence Against Women. It'll be starting up at St David's Park at 1:30 and travelling down here. And when we booked the Parliament lawns and were aware of having the lawns at the same time as these great people are when they're doing such a walk, it reminds me of how important it is to stand up against violence. And often that is what we are doing as peaceful protesters, and often we are accused of being violent. However, it's a far cry from any violent activity that any of us have ever been accused of or really found guilty of, because we just don't do it here in Tasmania. And I'd just like to make a call out here for the rights of peaceful protesters to stick to non-violent direct action, which is something that we've always done, and remember how important it is to eliminate violence against women. So please do join that march today. There's buckets going around the crowd as well. We are just a small little foundation who decided to call this Snap Rally as soon as the bill was tabled. So please do make donations today to help us pay for the advertising and the little costs that go along with rallies. This bill is about silencing people who hold this government to account. There's a certain guy in Tasmania who actually will never be silenced, I'm sure, and will hold this government to account consistently and consistently. So please welcome Bob Brown to the stage.
I'm here to defend our rights, to defend our state, and defend the future of this state when we have when we have the right to protest. I'd like to first up acknowledge the first and greatest protesters in this land post-invasion, the Indigenous people of Tasmania who fought for Lutruwita in the greatest protest that we have seen in this recent record of history, and continue to stand and fight for their land. And make no mistake, this legislation is aimed at a lot of people, but not least and not less than anybody at the first Tasmanian community who is going to, as we just heard, stand for its land, not least the Tarkine, in the coming times, if the government here joins with the government in Canberra in allowing the rich heritage of the Tarkine to be desecrated. Ladies and gentlemen, I've got a late message. It comes from the Premier himself. He was unable to join our rally today because he's received an urgent call from Beijing. And President Xi has said, well, you told me that repressing protesters was such a great idea. How come we've lost all but one seat in the overnight election in Hong Kong? And I think President Xi is saying to Will Hodgman, beware the same doesn't happen to you in Tasmania. Now, I can't speak for Will Hodgman, although I will, in a little while, do my best. But what I do know is that the magnificence of Tasmania, which is a beacon, to use Allegas Trahanas' words, in a largely dull and uniform world, and its natural bounty, which is fundamental to its wealth, its job creation, and its reputation worldwide. Yay! In 2019, didn't happen because people didn't protest. It happened because people had the right to protest and took that right. And they shaped this Tasmania we have. From those people who marched, firstly, who defended country, but then marched through the streets of Hobart to end transportation, rioted in the streets of Launceston against railway ticket prices. Did you know about that one? Rallied against the potential use of conscription in World War I. And right the way down the line have stood up for social justice, human rights, and of course, from Pedder to the Franklin, to Wesley Vale and Guns Pulp Mill, and the Forest, and now the Tarkine, Bruny Island. How about not consulting the people of Bruny before handing over the lighthouse on the weekend? Will Hodgman. Are they going to protest? Well, if they do, they might find themselves locked up there as an exhibit for tourists coming down the line. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Will Hodgman won't defend this state's right to get a fair return on its resources, whether they be mineral, forestry, or natural beauty, or our seas, so that it can properly fund health, education, and all the services that people have a right to in this state but are being sold out on by this government. Will Hodgman won't defend somebody to paddle out, row out in their boat and sample water on a fish farm. 4 years in jail. Tassal was here with the launch. Will Hodgman's not going to honour so many people before by saying, yes, you have a right to peaceful protest in the forest, suffer the consequences under the existing police laws if you do. Oh no, he's had messages from Tahan and other logging companies saying we cannot argue in this age of climate emergency and species extinction. We can't argue against peaceful protesters because the public backs them. We want them taken out. And what's Will Hodgman done? He's tugged his forelock to the Chamber of, I've forgotten whether it's Commerce, Industry or Horrors, but the Chamber of Big Business, and said, well, we'll lock them up. Will Hodgman won't stand in defence of the wilderness, which makes this state an exemplar on a planet where natural destruction is rampant. But he's going to give it to the Green Shoe Brigade and lock you up if you say we're going to stand in defence of that wilderness, which is every Tasmanian's birthright. What Will Hodgman will do is lock you up for having a different idea to his and standing on a footpath or in a building or in a business premises or in a forest or next to on a fish farm to demonstrate the strength of your feeling. Here, this is the leader of this state will lock up his fellow citizens because they have a difference of opinion and peacefully stand by it. What sort of premier is that? Will Hodgman is selling out not only Tasmania but the rights of all Tasmanians with this legislation. So we have a Will who won't. Will won't look after Tasmania. Will won't defend the right of Indigenous Tasmanians. Will won't protect our wilderness. Will won't keep our seas clear of industrial pollution. Will won't look after neighbourhoods who object to some mega project coming into their region without consultation. Will won't keep public assets from private right. He's going to give $65 million cable car paid for by Tasmanians, effectively the profits to big business at Cradle Valley up to Dove Lake. Announced that in December. So we have Premier Will won't leading temporarily this state. Well, Will, if you won't, we will. We'll stand for Tasmania. We'll stand for the right to protest. We'll stand for our Indigenous brothers and sisters. We'll stand for the wilderness. Hey, Will, one thing we have greater than you is a bigger will than you. Take this legislation and put it in the rubbish bin. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Bob Brown, and thank you all for coming out. Before we leave, I just wanted to get a little vote. Who here will put their hand up to defend Aboriginal heritage? Who here will put your hand up to defend Lutruwita and Tasmania? And who here will stand up to defend the right to protest? Thank you all for coming, and please do keep taking action. We really need you these next few days. Contact everyone you can who's been talked about today. Madeline Ogilvie, Sue Hickey, please do take the effort and let everyone you know about the petition. Petitions like this, I know, are sometimes a little bit like they're not going to work, but they will. We need more people to sign this petition. Thank you all, and go well.